The Bohr effect. This was first described in 1904 by Christian Bohr.
Simply stated, hemoglobin's oxygen binding affinity is inversely related to acidity and the concentration of CO2. Where CO2 is low, the hemoglobin molecule wants to bind with oxygen. It wants to pick it up. Where CO2 is high, it wants to drop off the oxygen. It wants to give it up. Where are some of these places that this might occur? We could look at the lungs. At the lungs, we have a low level of CO2. So the hemoglobin molecule wants to bind with oxygen. At the cellular level, the cells are pushing out a lot of CO2, producing a lot of CO2, and the local environment, the CO2 is high. So the hemoglobin molecule then wants to drop off its oxygen. Let's look at some models. The heme is represented by the 4 black giant clothespins. The protein structures are represented by the blue and red ribbon. So in the hemoglobin molecule, there are 4 heme groups, the black clothespins. And on each end of the black clothespin there is one ferrous molecule, Fe2. This is the bonding site of the oxygen. In the area of the lung, oxygen is abundant and CO2 is rare. So oxygen will be attracted to the ferrous molecule on the end of the heme. Here comes the first one in. When our first oxygen bonds to the hemoglobin molecule, it shifts a conformity in the protein strands, which then causes the next hemoglobin molecule to shift its position. I like to say it puckers up or opens up. This makes this oxygen bonding to this second ferrous molecule more easier than to the first one. The second oxygen that has bonded to the heme shifts the position of the third heme. The third heme is now easier to bond. After the third oxygen has bonded, the fourth heme molecule has repositioned itself to a state that it is very easily to bond to oxygen. Now this hemoglobin molecule is fully bonded with 4 oxygen molecules, one on each of the heme molecule. This is 100% saturation, 4 out of 4. When it reaches the tissues area, it picks up CO2 and unloads its oxygen. A CO2 molecule. The CO2 molecule will come in, and the CO2 molecule's bonding sites are in the protein. So the protein will pick up, did you just see that? The protein will pick up the CO2. The CO2 molecule will bond in the strands of the protein and change the conformity of the heme molecule. It's no longer in the same position. As it changes position, it releases the oxygen, which then roll off into the cell. This change in this position causes the next hemoglobin to change its position. And now, like a cascade effect, it releases. As more CO2 comes in and bonds with the proteins, each heme changes its shape and releases its oxygen. Now the hemoglobin, which has picked up CO2, causing it to drop its oxygen, makes its way back to the lungs. The low concentration of CO2 at the lungs, the CO2 then exits the hemoglobin molecule by simple diffusion. At the lungs, the CO2 leaves the hemoglobin by simple diffusion and exits through the lungs. This allows the hemoglobin and the heme molecule, without the extra CO2 on it, to rearrange its shape back to a conformal shape that will allow oxygen to be picked up again. The first oxygen that bonds is the hardest, and it causes the next one to change shape, and then that fills up with oxygen till we have 4. And we repeat the cycle all over again at the cellular level. This is the Bohr effect, where there's a lot of CO2 at the cellular level. It bonds to the hemoglobin, changes the shape of the molecule, and causes the oxygen to be dropped off. It then travels around to the lungs, where there's low CO2, and the CO2 exits the hemoglobin. This allows the hemoglobin to rearrange itself and prepare to pick up oxygen again. Have a good day.